and welcome to yet another session of In Dialogue Foundation's Certificate Course in Dialogue Studies 2024-2025. Today we have the pleasure of having with us Dr. Tarushikha Sarvesh, and she will be speaking on History of Public Sphere and Women. Dr. Tarushikha Sarvesh is Assistant Professor of Sociology at the Advanced Center of Women's Studies, Aligarh Muslim University. She specializes in development sociology, gender studies, multiple marginalities, and social exclusion. She focuses on caste and cultural studies from a gender perspective. In the past, she has directed an ICSSR-funded project on people's lived experiences in the conflict zone of Kashmir with special reference to women and youth. She was also a co-investigator in a research project with funding from Massey University titled The Outbreak of Online Education in the Growing Digital Economy and Digital Gender Divide Issues. Dr. Sarvesh's areas of interest are cultural studies, gender studies, theories of justice and development, and she regularly contributes to various journals and books. She also writes in popular media platforms such as Newsclick, Firstpost, The Wire, The Print, the India Forum, the Telegraph, and News 18. Dr. Sarvesh, you have up to 2 hours for the session. You may leave as much time for questions and discussions as you like. Ma'am, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Pragya. So we'll dive straight into it. So I'm actually excited for this session because I'll get to know a lot of your perspectives on the things that we keep discussing historically, and they're equally relevant today. Some of the questions and some of the statements that I'll share with you, which were being asked in 18th century, 19th century, which are still being asked, and many questions remain unanswered. So straight and dive into it immediately and deeply. So we'll start with the first reading that I shared with you. So I'll go reading wise, but also I'll connect the ideas, because the first reading was about the rhetoric of women's history and women's fears, as they used to say in those days, and the separate spheres, how things were being separated over time, before industrialization, during industrialization, and the institutions that were developing, how revolutions contributed to women's realities. What sort of contribution was that? Was it productive, constructive, or was it taking them back to domesticity? So all those things we'll do, and I'll try to connect all the readings, but I'll try to stick to the readings that I shared with you, so that when you go back again and try to read on your own and maybe give it a second reading, you'll have a better perspective on these things. So the first reading was about separate spheres, female worlds, women's place, the rhetoric of women's history. And it starts with Tocqueville's perspective on American women and their realities. So when Tocqueville was in America and was trying to work on democracy in America, his work, he a few interesting observations he made about women's realities. He said that though the previous aristocratic system was breaking down and women were getting more freedom and independence, they were gaining more independence, they were gaining more freedom. But he said the best thing about American women, and he was comparing with European women. So he said that the best thing about American women, that despite all these things, they are choosing domesticity, which is a virtuous thing to do. A dignified woman would choose domesticity, would choose, a proper sphere. So he projected, and there's a very interesting paragraph where he says, I think it's in the first 2-3 pages, so please read it when you again go through the reading. He says he alluded to the separation of male and female spheres in the course of his contrasting and impressionistic portraits of young middle-class American women. So he said that, if you ask me, the best thing about the women in America is that they have very good mannerisms. And despite the democratic spaces that are provided to everyone and even to women, their manners are properly. So they have very good manners and they are proper women. So that's why Tocqueville's observation, so most of the thinkers later on, even Betty Friedan, even Simone de Beauvoir, most of these thinkers, they kept going back to the readings and the notes given by Tocqueville, because these observations were made and the idea of proper sphere was popularized through these readings. So and then some we'll talk about historiography, that how the spheres and how the public sphere as a frame of analysis was taken up by historians from these readings and from these discussions, and later on it became a central argument. The public sphere became the central argument even to discuss the state system, to discuss media, to discuss people's participation, to gauge the level of democracy that the societies had, and the scale of democracy and democratic engagements, and also to see the changes that were happening in society. So the sphere, the lens of public sphere and the lens of gender dynamics, when combined together, it revealed a lot of changes that were going on in the society, and these changes were not always linear in direction. So these changes were, going back and forth and taking a circular route. So we understand that history does repeat itself, but history also is not linear. That's why we say that there are multiple histories. There is no one history. And if we go into the archaeology of it and the genealogy of it, we know that there is no one starting point, and we have to give equal importance to all the stages, all the historical stages, to all the historical phases, why things were happening. So, and also we need interconnected understanding and knowledge. For example, in gender studies or in women's studies, in social exclusion studies, we might study specific implications of democracy, specific implications of spaces. But we also need to know the background for that. We need to know the world wars, the period, what was it doing, what were the roles of men and women during that period, the role of men and women during American Revolution, the role of men and women during French Revolution, because gender dynamics is the foundation of all the societies and of all the cultural systems. That's the foundation, that's the basic structure, as we say, of all the societies, and rest of the superstructures are built on that. And how these arrangements, how genders or sexes are arranged in societies, we understand a lot of other institutions through that lens. So when we are talking about this, we have to keep in mind the background. We have to keep in mind the background of American War of Independence, as they say, or American Revolution, whatever you want to call it. The French Revolution, we need to keep in mind. We need to keep in mind the period, the 18th century, the 19th century period, because only then we'll be able to understand why things were happening the way they were happening, and what kind of sphere was being created, and how was it unfolding? Why was there support for that kind of sphere, of that kind of, as when we discuss separate spheres? So this, keeping that in mind, I hope all of us are on the same page here at this point. Yeah? Okay. So here, the period that we are discussing in the first part is post-American Revolution period, right? Where institutions were being built, where the language was being improved. So the court language, or the earlier language, which was considered crude or politically incorrect, the language was changing, and mostly women's literature was changing that language. And that's why the idea of pun intended, pun unintended, the idea of pun was also part of this change and reform that was happening. And it was also mocked a lot. Sometimes today also, when we say, oh, this is not politically correct, people still, so all these ideas still exist. So when we try to refine something, when we try to reform something, people get rebuked, people get humiliated, the groups get rebuked who try to take these initiatives. So at that time, women's groups were being rebuked, women were being humiliated and questioned and mocked that, this is too feminine, and we don't need all these things in the society. These things are already there. Why to, change the language? And, it's not, coarseness is masculinity, and why to change? So all those things were happening. So this is the period. Now, in this period, women got a chance. So during, different wars that happened over time historically, women got a chance by default. Some efforts were being made. There were always women, there are always people who want to break out of the mold, and who want to create things, and who want to contribute differently, and they don't stick to the rigid social norms and social structures. So those people always exist. So along with their efforts, the historical changes also contributed to people's lives. So during wars, when men were away, women started contributing to, the work outside of the private sphere, or the housebound or the homebound work, as we say. So they started venturing out. So there's a term for it that they used. You may note it down. You'll also find that in the reading. They started saying that out to work, out to work. Because earlier women's work was not seen as work, it was seen as help. Even when they were going out and working, it was mostly seen as help, and men's work was seen as real work, and women were always there to help in men's work. Today also, I'll keep bringing in the contemporary examples along with the historical debates. Today also, in most of the universities, many times girl students, so when boys are going out on protests and dharnas, as we say in India, so when we ask these students, the girl students, that what's the agenda? Are you politically aware of the demands that are being made through these protests? So women say, or girl students in some universities, they say, no, we are going with our brothers. We need to support our brothers. So today also in public sphere, women many times see themselves in a role where they're assisting, or strengthening the movements taken up by others or initiated by others, and they see that they can be the force which can strengthen that movement, but they won't be the primary force that could propel the movement. So those days also, women were seeing their help, their work was being seen as help. And many people, many women also adjusted to this reality that their work was largely help, and they would do it to support their family. It was not by choice, but because of the circumstances that occurred in those days. But the best thing about it was that women did start going out, and they were working. The thing, the change started that even after revolution. That's why it's always important to keep in mind that revolutionary women who actually, when all these wars were happening, women were supporting people at home and people outside, and they started contributing to the economic development and to the economic realities. Uh, they There was a guilt in many women that they are not able to contribute properly at home or in the domestic sphere. So how many of you feel that this sort of guilt is still relevant and is still present? The kind of guilt at that time in the initial stages when women started going out, and some women who wanted, some women who gained the consciousness that yes, this is the thing women should also do. They felt even more guilty because they felt that they are losing the moorings, they're losing the attachments, from their relationships at home, or the primordial relationships that we have, our cultural, religious, familial relations. So they felt that Are they breaking the cord? So they were they were double-minded about it. So how many of you feel or can give me a few examples? Because I'll keep asking for your perspective also on this. Because we hear in most of the university spaces also, people feel that things have completely changed and there's a complete overhaul of society, and now these things are can't be the talking point. So how many of you feel that there's still some guilt, there are remnants of this guilt even when women's work is fully acceptable in most of the societies, but women as individuals, even when nobody is saying, because people also say this, that who's stopping you, who's saying anything to you, but do you think that the guilt remains?
Hi, ma'am. Thank you for the session. Although you've just started, and I hope we have a good long discussion. I told Pragya ji that I'm really interested in this because this is my field of thesis also, research also. And when we talk about guilt, I'd like to bring not just the guilt of working, leaving homes and going out. There's also another guilt which women are continuously pushed for and continuously let's say blamed for, and that is to have kids after marriage. So I'd like to share my personal experience. I've been married to almost 25 years, and I'm very happy child free, like very happy. But every time I go out and people are like, "Khush khabri kab de rahe ho? Good news kab hai?" And I always take it in a good way because for me, khush khabri is I'm also into politics. I'm a doctor by profession. I got into active politics. So for me, good news has always been contesting elections and becoming something, becoming a policy maker. Then gradually change the paths of many women and young girls that I meet. So I always tell them, yeah. So whenever the election year comes, I tell them that that's going to be a good news year. And all these ladies, and I want to put it in inverted commas here, that women who've been uh, they've been programmed in certain ways. We all have been programmed, and we've inherently sort of made it in our genetic system that we are meant to marry and breed. We are meant to take care of the family. We are meant as caretakers. I just attended a conference. It was on care economy and decent work. And it was very funny for me because we shared a video where they first showed a slide where a woman was working throughout. She was taking care of home, outside, cooking food for the husband and everything. Second slide was the male counterpart doing all these things. And everybody there started laughing. And they said, how is it possible, da? Like, this is not possible. So the inherently sort of those values that we have always been given ever since we are born, that women are supposed to take care of household, they're supposed to take care of the work, but the care work is seldom recognized. We're trying to push for a reform where the care work is actually sort of the government starts to acknowledge the care work and start giving financial sort of giving you finances for it. So the first cry is of acknowledging care work.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this guilt remains, as you said, that, now it has expanded and diversified, that the expectations at every stage, of rites to passage, at every stage, a woman's expectations, expectations of a woman, they just multiply. So these things were happening in those days. These things are happening now. So I'll ask another question later towards the end. So here we see that what Tocqueville said about this, that these women were still dignified and these women were still attached to their domesticity and purity, and they could maintain it despite having all these spaces. So we are talking about these revolutionary women, the women of the period of revolutions, and then this sort of outcome happened after the revolutions, and people were still praising and kept women confined to the domesticity and their domestic. But then there were other that existed in those days. So people like Edward Pesson said that he he countered and challenged Tocqueville's observations, and he said that these were limited and were based on presuppositions affirming the stereotypes. So there were people who countered, though it's considered a classic and everybody reads and everybody has to read. Even the feminist thinkers were also going back to these texts, but they said that you have to read it with a pinch of salt and you have to be, apply caution while reading this text, because they don't represent the complete reality of those days. Still, it's important, even if it's a pocket in the society, even if a pocket of society follows certain ideals and follows certain ideologies, it will have the potential to influence the larger society. So that also has to be taken into account. That's why it's important to read the text. And that's why in qualitative researches, we also say that outliers are equally important. In quantitative researches, outliers are not important and they are usually not analyzed. But in qualitative researches and in longitudinal, long-term researches, in narrative-based researches, in conversation-based researches, outliers are equally important. So we cannot ignore these texts. Then there were psychologists also. So here we say that anything endorsed by scientific inquiry, people buy that very easily, and people quote those findings, and people quote those theories and findings. And so Clifford Geertz, who was also an anthropologist and studied society, says something very interesting about common sense. He says that it is something that mind filled with presuppositions concludes. So that is common sense, that, mind filled with presupposition, whatever that mind concludes is called common sense. So many people started pointing out that psychologists were also, when these debates became part of the public sphere, when these debates became part of the larger discussion, psychologists also somehow endorsed these stereotypes through their findings. So, for example, Erik Erikson also gave this presupposition a psychological foundation in describing girls' and boys' usage of blocks while playing. So, Erikson said that, when the blocks are given to girls and boys, they use it very differently while playing. So girls make inner boundaries with those blocks, and boys make outer boundaries with those blocks. Hence, proven. So what was proven?
Can you just repeat that again?
Me? You want to repeat it?
Yeah, yes, ma'am.
Who said it? Sorry, I missed you. Is it Jaleel?
Yeah, I was... Oh.
No, sorry, somebody asked me to repeat. I just want to connect with that person.
Me, ma'am.
This is, sorry, I can't see your name properly. Can you say your name?
Dr. Denny Matthew John, ma'am.
Okay, all right, yeah. Thank you. So I'll repeat quickly and then I'll talk to you, Purvi. So I said that, many psychologists were also, not that they were doing it deliberately, but their findings somehow, they also endorsed the stereotypes and the presuppositions that existed in the society through their experiments. So they said, and Erikson specially said that, when you give playing blocks to boys and girls, they use it differently. So on the basis of that usage, they said that's why these two spheres are separate, because girls, they play with the blocks. When they play with the blocks, they make inner boundaries, of anything, of a house or, any space. So they make the inner boundaries, and boys are and they're playing together. So girls are making inner boundaries and boys are making outer boundaries. So hence proven. What was proven? That's what I asked. Yeah.
I can only think of one thing, because women were internalized to be around domestic chores. They've always seen their mothers or female figures doing domestic chores, household works. So they were always confined within those boundaries. So they always saw that what they saw, they replicated. But the male members, the male child, they were always exposed to the outside, the public spheres, the so-called outside boundaries. So they would always know what was outside, what existed outside the domestic reigns, like that.
Yes. So, yes, absolutely. So, but what was proven? The stereotypes were proven through
definitely
through experiments. through scientific experiments. So when we're doing academics, when we are, doing research, it has to have multiple rounds, and it cannot stop at the point where it starts proving the stereotypes and where it satisfies your sentiments. We shouldn't stop at that point. In fact, we should do the reverse. If we feel that our research is matching the larger sentiment, we need to repeat multiple times more to see that, even after more experiments, is it still matching the sentiments? And if it matches your sentiment, you have to be very careful. You have to try to find the point where it shouldn't match your sentiment. But even after multiple experiments, if it matches, then yeah, of course, that it stands the test of time and scientific temperament and scientific approach. Mr. Ranveer, yeah.
Yeah. I consider that as a flawed experiment per se, because I consider that when we are conducting such kind of experiment, and because we don't have a control group for that, and the whole experiment is heavily influenced with the socialization of the participants for that experiment. Absolutely. So that I will be considering that as a flawed experiment in that sense.
Absolutely. That's why many things, when people try to prove through psychological experiments and they call it scientific, maybe their methods are scientific and everything, but as Mr. Ranveer also said that, even to test those methods, you need multiple ways of doing things. You need controlled environment, you need controlled groups, and then you also need to compare. So, and sometimes what happens that people pick those experiments or the part of those experiments to prove the point. So again, as researchers or as readers, we should also again try to do that, if one person has done this experiment, then read the entire methodology of that experiment and then come to conclusion whether you should quote those experiments, whether you should quote those findings or not. Because in this time and age, in the age of social media, and where people are running short on time all the time, people look for these experiments which satisfy their sentiments, so that even in public sphere while debating, because we are having a lot of debates these days but not much dialogue. So debates are there to win, right? But if you want a dialogue, then you will get into the nitty-gritties, you will get into the nuances of those ideas, those issues, those concerns. So this was a problem with this experiment as well. And many experiments of this sort were happening in those days, which were, we can't say that it was done deliberately, but it was, supporting the larger sentiment that existed at that time. Yeah. Dr. Purvi.
So I'd like to just ask here, like how Ranveer sir said, it is mostly socializing behavior. But what if you relate with that experiment? What if the women who were actually a part of that bigger experiment, not many of them, if that was relatable, that becomes an empirical evidence for them, right? And then you wouldn't need a control group because you've had that experience, you've lived that experience. And that is why most of these experiments hold true. That is why we are also studying about them, because we've somehow related with them. As much as women can see the whole readings, whole of it, we've all faced all of it in certain, these periods of our life, whatever, 3 decades or 2 decades. So that is why they become more relatable.
Yes. So I'll tell you. So this is exactly what happened. So when, some women gained consciousness and they started forming groups and they started making efforts, they started reading literature, because that was a period when subjects were also decided according to your sex. So if you were a male, you would get different subjects. If you were a female at all, if you're allowed to get educated, you will have different subjects. But literature, in fact, came very late to women. All right. So, sorry, literature came to women. Humanities and social sciences came very late to women. So at least when literature came to women, women started studying, reading literature. So today, in today's time and age, humanities and social science is considered as a, softer discipline than mathematics and science. But in those days, it was still considered a man's domain. So which is very interesting, how it turned from, the softer version, because in those days it was considered more of a political subject. These things made political human beings. And it was part of the politicization of our thinking and experimenting. That's why social sciences and humanities were considered more of a male domain in those days. So there was entire struggle for women to be included and given equal rights to study all the subjects equally. And women had the right, access and exposure to the subjects the way men had. So this was the 18th century struggle. So Wollstonecraft and many other activists and writers in those days. So the first one was for women's education in the 18th century. So there, very important and pertinent point you said. So here, women like Barbara Welter, you will find it in the reading also when you go through, they realized that the 19th century literature was creating a cult of womanhood. So this cult of womanhood, and the term was also used by other thinkers and writers. So people who were studying the 19th century literature, they realized that there was a pattern and it was creating a cult of womanhood. They were creating and constructing these ideals related to women. It was related to domesticity. If we had to define what was the cult of womanhood, it was related to domesticity, piety, purity, and submissiveness. And she said that, and later on, when Betty Friedan, they were studying the 20th century literature, again, the similar pattern. So she came up with the word feminine mystique, which was again related to the same ideals of the cult of womanhood. And as you said, they said that most of the women, they actually quite defended these characteristics. Why did they defend these characteristics? They said that, women said that it affords security, not only from the world, but from delusion and errors of every kind. Do these arguments resonate today? Do women say that, it's okay because at least it keeps us safe? So I'll just pick randomly. Jay, what do you think about it?
Yeah, I agree. This is sort of, a compromise that has been made where, there is this push for feminism, right? Where it's either Western white women led sort of liberal feminism. I would say I'm not sure about the terminology. I've read the theories, but not sure about the terminology. So I may get some wrong.
That,
But
the ideal of equality and all those things
yeah,
in one direction and with a one frame that you
yeah.
said that there was a
So
pushback. Yeah.
so it has, it had its phases where it went from suffrage movement to the current phase where it's sort of asking for equal pay. I think that's the current
Latest.
thing where wage gap, essentially, that's the main issue right now. And the Me Too movement, of course, sexual harassment and also women's safety. And basically, even if you look at a country like India, where this sort of culture, I think there's a lot of debate on marital rape as well right now that is happening, where sort of this argument is that where women are basically encouraged, sort of quote unquote encouraged, where you either for your own safety you stay at home, so you opt for work from home jobs, right?
Yes.
You opt for jobs that offer you sort of an environment where you work with other women.
Yes.
So that also limits your options, right? Where you can't get into a male dominated field such as finance or something. You either opt for teacher or nurse, where historically female dominated jobs. And this sort of compromise where I didn't want to do this job, but this is like something that offers me a career, this offers me money, and this offers me safety, right, in the company of other women. And because I know if I like go into this do an MBA, do work hard, and go into a male dominated field, sort of work in a very very big company, there is still a threat to my safety. That's sort of what I have understood in.
Yes. True.
Yeah.
True. And of course, and why shouldn't women be worried about, or anybody for that matter, be worried about safety, security? That's a valid concern. So that was one logic that women were giving, that, it's all right. It's more about safety. And if you have to choose one over the other, then this is more important. And not just that, but they were also saying that it will keep you safe from delusion and errors. So why errors? Errors are a common phenomenon, right? That males and females both make errors.
Yeah, errors, but it's sort of this it's a pattern where a man makes an error. That's not a that's not a big deal. Okay, it can be
That's
fixed. But
not
if a woman
stereotype.
makes an error, it becomes it's a problem, right? A man makes an error, it's his singular problem. If one single woman makes an error, makes a mistake, makes an error, that is completely natural. It becomes the problem of the entire like sort of gender.
Yes, yes,
That is
yes.
how
Because
we.
that is more stigmatized. So women don't
Yeah.
want to err. They want to avoid error as much as possible. Sometimes they don't even report. They don't even share
Yeah.
their experiences because they feel they'll be blamed for that. So absolutely wonderful. So next was, as you said, that people. And sometimes the way religions are interpreted. So many women said that Saint Paul knows what are women's rights and how women should behave, and what are the things that women will gain through this sort of arrangement and order in society. So I'll come to another interesting point on this. This was also considered. I'll come to that later. First, I'll come to this idea of, not just the changing period in history, circumstances were changing, but along with that, another pattern that thinkers and writers identified was the impact of ideology. That even after revolution, even when the spaces were opened for everybody, even when women started going out, what was the thing that the value system, the idea, and the mental structures were not changing as much? So they identified the role of ideology in that. So in the 19th century, stereotypes was so encouraging but constraining at the same time. So women were encouraged, their status was elevated, they were given importance. And again, I would say that even in today's time and age, we see a similar situation. We see that, women are considered goddesses, or women are considered, or mothers, their status is elevated. And people say that, everything revolves around your mother. And if you can't respect your mother, nobody will respect you. So all these ideas still, they are equally relevant. And in those days also, so women were, double-minded. They were in doubt all the time that on the one hand, their status is elevated. The stereotypes that were generated were actually very encouraging, that you would want to align with those stereotypes very happily, because you would feel that, you're gaining importance because of those stereotypes. But they were equally constraining. So they were constraining at the same time. And that is why this guilt was imposed, guilt and confusion. So women were confused about making choices. Pragya, yeah.
Yeah, I have to say this. I'll just keep it short. There's this influencer who is, who basically tries to bring back Shringar or getting ready, And there was this entire conversation where I realized that women, especially during festivals, now we have festive season, they feel guilty about not being able to dress up the Indian way. It is actually very inconvenient. But we used to have these elaborate rangolis, which essentially were to-do lists for for village women who are illiterate. So they would, to remember which corner of the room they need to clean, they would just like make that. And that's why the festival rangoli used to be bigger. It was not a decor, it was a, so all these things like doing that, dressing up, it's going for garba because you're expected to do that, not because you're tired, you come back from office and you still feel like you feel FOMO, if nothing, if not the guilt that you want to be part of it. And it's completely, it's out there, but there's so much guilt about just dressing up, just the festivities.
Yes. Exactly. So you can just keep adding components. You can keep adding, for example, this sort of a burden that, you have to, the whole idea of performativity, the way you have to perform at certain occasions, on certain events, at certain time period. Yeah. So all these things, they keep adding to the confusion and they keep adding to the burden. So people say it's double burden. Now I think it's quadrupled, the kind of expectations. And so the world is changing, things are changing, the factors are involved, market is there, state is there. But this is instead of resolving, so as Amartya Sen says, that there are old problems and new problems, and old problems are not completely resolved while new problems are added. So now we have simultaneously old problems and new problems. Yeah, Purvi wanted to say something.
I have a lot to say all the time because this is my topic and you're very interesting. And because this is also relatable, I'd like to just add on to Pragyaji's statement, not just, a guilt of dressing up. So Karva Chauth is coming, right? And it's one of the most patriarchal fast or whatever cultural you want to call it. And I've been always against it. As long as I remember, jab se sayani hui hu, I've always been like, this is a very patriarchal thing to do. Why do we have all the fast for men? Bete ke liye, pati ke liye, pita ke liye. Why don't we have fast for sisters or for mothers or for ourselves, right? Initially, this also supposed to be was for the women's life, but then again translated into patriarchal language for men. So before getting married, everybody started telling. I'll just finish and then you can add. Okay. So even even my marriage, I was not very mushy interested. Like, fine, it's a rite of passage. Everybody has to get married. That's fine. But the whole idea of wearing this heavy lehenga, itne ka lehenga, so much jewelry, and then doing fast all around, and then the first Karwa Chauth came. And oh God, it was so difficult for me to explain everybody at my place, both my in-laws, at my family, and my friends circle, the whole thing, that I'm not be fasting. I'm not going to be fasting. And they were horrendous. They shamed me, called me names, and all sort of negativity came through me. But I was still very consistent. But it did put me in a phase of guilt, right? So that is so true that the whole scenario of our custom, our society, it is built in such a way that you always put women at shame. If she's going out for her work, you put her at shame by saying that first you have household responsibilities, do that. She gets married, she has to fulfill her household responsibilities, then it's the work, then it's the child. So the work always takes the secondary stage. She herself takes the secondary stage because then she has to take care of the house, right? She becomes a caretaker. So, but then she cannot become a caretaker for her own self. Her mental health goes it spirals down.
Yes. So I'll just add before Mr. Who wanted to say? He wanted to contribute, Mr. Ranveer? So I'll just add one thing to Purvi's comment, that this guilt thing, so for women, it's guilt. For men, it's sometimes confining and constraining because, for example, in villages in India, in many places still, men are not, supposed to be seen as, soft-hearted, and they're not supposed to take their crying babies in their lap if women are not around. They have to, ask the mother to carry the baby. If they're carrying the baby, things are changing. But so these structures were... equally, I don't want to use the word problematic, but confining and, adding guilt and burden to both the sexes. But of course, it was disproportionately adding guilt to both the sexes. But it was not always a gala time for men also. So the things, they could not share their emotions. Clear, openly or freely, and so many psychological issues emerge from this sort of constraint, and where you have to limit your behavior and where you have to align your behavior according to the expectations and the social system. So it was adding guilt and concern and burden to everyone's lives, but of course disproportionately, because the kind of guilt and burden and the nature of guilt and burden was different. You're saying something, Denny? No offense, but I feel it's better to... Can you say it? Yeah, here, now it's open. But I feel it's better to note down the questions and ask it during the question time. Otherwise, it's kind of disrupting the flow of thoughts. No, don't worry. It won't disrupt the flow of thoughts because that's the nature of this discussion. And we lose actually the flow of thought if I don't ask the question right now, because it is adding, your perspectives are adding to it. It's more organic and inclusive. It's not, this is also very interesting. What you said is very interesting because usually lectures or, it's a discussion, it's a dialogue, and it's not just a lecture. I'm giving you inputs and insights, and then I also want you to extend the argument and bring the contemporary debates. I'm giving the historical debates, and I want you to contribute to the contemporary debate so that we have a holistic understanding by the end of it, right? So don't worry about it. And where I feel that I need to stop you, I'll stop you from elaborating your experiences. So the next is the idea of separation. For example, again, I'll have to ask this question. If I ask you if I ask you this question, that why are separate spaces problematic? Why is separation of spaces problematic? Because many thinkers, they started seeing that separation of spaces was problematic. And why was it problematic? What is, according to you, is separation of spaces problematic? If I give you equal facilities in, room 1 and same facilities in room 2, would you ask me a question that, why are there 2 rooms? And there is 1 hall also. And I can accommodate those many people in that hall as well, but I'm giving you separate rooms. Would you ask me any questions, or will it be okay with you? Because both the rooms have almost all the facilities.
To be honest, hello. I wouldn't mind that if there is, as you said, equal facilities, because from my background, I'm from Kazakhstan, okay? I studied in a high school, in a fully school for girls, okay? Only girls. But this school was not related to any religion, okay? Because it was Islamic school, no. Not because of that. Because there in Kazakhstan, we have a system of boarding schools, gifted children's schools. And all gifted children's schools are one gender schools. But we have the same classes, everything, dormitory, everything. So for me, it was always okay. I never felt myself, some kind of under-evaluated, so on and so forth. And when you were talking about shame, very interesting. In your context here, women are shamed that they are going out, so on and so forth. In my country, because we are so much into work, okay? In my country, we don't have a problem of women working, women doing some social works, okay? Because fully Russian-minded, post-user country.
Yes.
In my country, women feel shame that they couldn't give enough time to their family. There is other side. And or we have, for example...
What are they ashamed of? Can you repeat this?
I have friends, and they see that I'm here in India, okay, seeing this, that, and they're at home with children. Okay, and they constantly feel like they are being ashamed for the journey that they've chosen. They've chosen to be a mother, a good mother, a good wife. Okay, that is their philosophy. But
they're ashamed. They're ashamed for being the nurturer.
Yes, but modern world right now encourage all women. That is, some not cons, but other aspects of feminism. You see, it encourages women to work, to do this, that, to be prosperous, so on and so forth. And they constantly feel like they're missing out something. And I'm like, come on, no, you're doing very valuable thing. You're raising child. It's okay. But nevertheless, there is other side. That's very interesting. But
that's very interesting.
Coming to your question, no, I wouldn't. I would like.
You don't feel that there is any problem.
No, because
but those thinkers in those days, how would you pronounce your name?
Judas.
Judas.
Yes.
Okay. So very interesting. See, this is why I ask questions in between. So again, when we'll go deeper into it, in a couple of minutes, we'll see the same arguments. What Judas, right? What Judas gave?
Yes.
The same arguments, the same discussions were happening in those days also. So I'll come to that quickly so that we don't lose track of what she said. Yeah.
Randall has a comment in the comment chat box.
Oh,
says
okay.
It creates clubs, boys clubs and girls cliques.
Sorry, it creates clubs, boys clubs and girls cliques. All right, yes, it does. So at that time, I'll just quickly say that separation. Are you aware of these Jim Crow laws? Anybody? You're aware of Jim Crow laws? Jay is aware of Jim Crow laws. Anybody else? Okay, so Jay, can you quickly say?
So these were basically the segregation laws that were implemented in America, where people of a certain background, skin color, basically black people, were not
Correct.
allowed to share the spaces with white people. So
Yeah.
if you basically, for example, if you went to sit in a restaurant, you wouldn't be, if you were a black person, you wouldn't be served at the counter. You had to go around the back and get your food there elsewhere, like from the back, and without for proper dignity as well. While a white family could just walk in, order food, sit at the
Right.
table, and get it. So
Right.
that's the Jim Crow laws, the segregation.
That's the broad idea of Jim Crow laws,
Yeah.
yes. And within that, but they said that, the leaders said that even when there is segregation, if they have these apartments, they have all these facilities, they also have their own park, they have their system of commutation, they have these toilets. It's just that maybe those are steel toilets and the others are ceramic toilets. That's maybe the difference of material. No specific or no consequential difference, as we say. They said that you have access, it's not that your life is not moving. So with those understandings, people were discussing these things in the sphere of race, in the sphere of the cultural background. So they started seeing differences. So apart from equality, and apart from what Judas, right? Please forgive me for pronouncing it incorrectly. They started seeing differences. So they felt that, the separation of space when it came to sexes, females and males, and the word women's sphere was being used and women's proper sphere was being used. So later people, as their consciousness was raised, they felt that it is denigrating women, because why this separation? There's something about this separation. People felt that it was not on equal footing and it was leading to subordination. That's why there was problem. Otherwise, why would there be any problem with separation? If I want to sit in a corner in a restaurant, I like a peaceful, sweet little corner for myself, and I want my peace. That should be all right, as long as I have the right and choice to do that. But if I don't have the choice, either am I doing it out of guilt or pressure, or I don't have any choice, not just guilt and pressure, but I'm doing it because I'm supposed to do it, I'm supposed to sit in a corner, then I won't feel good about it. So that's what people started realizing, these separate spaces. So there were again two perspectives here. One perspective of subordination. The second perspective again was very interesting, that people also some thinkers also started seeing that these separate spaces are actually creating solidarity among women. They felt that these spaces are giving emotional support. They're able to support women, and it is giving them more autonomy, because they are able to discuss things. They don't really have to depend on their male counterparts to for everything. They have their women, they have their friends, they have their female family members they can bank on. So these were two very interesting perspectives that emerged, ways of seeing, as we say. So one was what we were discussing till now, and the other, what she explained, Kazakhstan, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So what you explained, so those debates were happening in those days also. So people started saying that, why to see it from this lens all the time? Why can't we see what is this separation doing, and what kind of bonds are being created through this separation? So this was also one perspective, which was very interesting, because married women's property right was recognized, and married women could depend on each other, could depend on their family members. They could form solidarities with their female folks, and they didn't have to depend for their emotional needs. They didn't have to depend on men or male counterparts for their emotional needs. So that was another interesting perspective. But it was again countered. These were two emerging perspectives, but it was also countered because they felt that even when women were able to form solidarities, but the idea all the time that it's the women who have to, even in Kazakhstan, as you said, that it's the women. You didn't say that the men also feel equally about this situation. you said that women were feeling either guilty of not working or guilty of working. So in some places, it's why it's always the women who are either feeling guilty for working and women are feeling guilty for not working, right? So that one thing we have to acknowledge, that there is something specific about women in society. So they do this or they do that. It's catch-22 for women, devil in the deep sea situation for women. So this one thing is common across cultures. Even when we say that, in some cultural groups, women feel guilty for not working. In some cultural groups, women feel guilty for working. And we have seen, that is why cultural studies and relativism, it teaches us that when we see different cultural groups, we see that gender dynamics are not the same in all cultural groups. There were many, many tribes, Chambuli, Mundugumur, Arapesh, these 3 tribes. In one tribe, men and women both were docile. Men and women both were, not aggressive. They were more agreeable. In another, both were aggressive. Then in the third, men were not aggressive, women were aggressive. So it proves that there is no essential nature of men and women, or no essential characteristics. So it's unnecessary to essentialize that women think in this manner, men think in this manner. Their cultural circumstances, their geographical circumstances, and the whole the way the emotions are constructed and the way the characteristics are constructed, we see and we know that in different societies, even temperament differs. Men and women's temperament also differs. That is proven and that is recorded and noted very carefully. So keeping all these debates, so we are not concluding anything. We are only bringing in the debates, the historical debates that were happening around the whole idea of public sphere and the whole idea of women's sphere. So there was, in your reading also, you'll find a term, circle of social convention. So some people felt that, this circle of social convention was a cushion for women. It was giving them emotional support. You didn't have to go to anybody, as we said. So this circle of domesticity or circle of social convention, it was creating a circle. It was giving a chance of solidarity, of sharing one another's experiences. So they also saw it from the lens of solidarity. Rendell, you want to say something? You've raised your hand.
Yes, am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it also because, I mean, the story, the sharing about the blocks, it's also at a very early or formative state for both girls and boys, maybe 2 or 3 years. And
Yes.
then when you're saying that it's essentializing something, it's also making it biological. Like these differences,
Determinism.
so to say, are biological. And I think that is also, and that is one of the important things, that these differences between men and women then are biological, and that's why the woman's place is in a particular place, and then the man's place is to do certain things. And I wanted to add it then.
Can you speak a little louder? I think I missed a few sentences.
I was saying that it might be that it is considered even by researchers or psychologists also, it is considered biological, these differences, and that
Yes.
makes it like scientifically very objective, that this is the role of women, because that is indoors is where they draw the boundaries for themselves, biologically speaking, and this is the role for women.
Yes,
So
yes.
that essentializes or maybe makes it very deterministically so.
Yes, and backed by science and research, as you said, that it feeds in the whole idea of biological determinism and the idea of essentialization. But when we actually see different cultures, we realize that these arrangements are very different in different cultures, and in some cultures there are stark differences. The complete role reversals also exist, so which challenges this essentialization characteristics and biological determinism. Is that what you wanted to say, Randall? Okay, great. Then quickly we'll move because I think let's keep 45 minutes for discussion. So I'll quickly move to the next where in the period of industrialization, so when this happened, people that and they started where intersectionality comes in. So women, at that time, people said that, in America, it was not such an economically advanced society. Women's labor, even children labor. So women were going out, they were being the proletariat, they were the labor class, but mostly women of the lower strata were moving out and working in people like Aileen. They studied these changes during industrial period, and they felt that the industrial period was making the separation even more rigid. Why they said this, we'll understand it here. So they said that these separations were becoming more rigid and complex. So you remember the cult of womanhood? So the middle class women, they were maintaining the cult of womanhood. The more women were moving out to work, the more rigid these stereotypes and ideals, these were held with more rigidity. So there was a division of, there are two things, the lady and the mill girl. So the woman who was going and working in the mills, so there were, so they said that these are two different characteristics, the mill girl and the lady. So today also when we see people say that, she's ladylike. So being ladylike, that you have to maintain, that womanhood, the whole idea of purity and piety. So at that time also, so industrialization made things even more complex, so that they, divided women also, that women of different classes, women of different backgrounds. So now the separation of spaces, of spheres, and the intersectionality that was being added to people's identities and expectations and morality. And here also we were talking about essentialization. So how these characteristics were being essentialized again through further divisions, that what would be the characteristics of a mill girl? Would she be licentious? Would she be, more approachable? How would the lady be, who is still protecting the domestic environment and trying to behave in a as expected in a dignified manner? So these two terms emerged, the lady and the mill girl. People started writing about it and how these spaces were becoming more complex and rigid during this period. So in 1969, as they say, that woman's place is in the home, while poor women were increasingly participating as factory workers. So this idea that women's proper place is home, while people were seeing that poor women or women of underprivileged backgrounds, they were constantly and increasingly participating in factories and as factory workers. Another change that was seen was in terms of family system. So from joint family system, larger family system to nuclear family system. So some thinkers also felt that in larger families or joint families, women had more importance and more leadership role, while in nuclear families, that control was also gone out of women's hands. And so their male counterparts, they started dominating both the spaces, the private spaces, the private spaces and the public spaces. So private sphere, public sphere, people felt that, due to Engels also mentioned this in his work, that, how the transition from joint family to nuclear family, it's highly debatable. That's why I'm saying these are arguments that we are, bringing forth, but these are debatable, right? We need to debate these arguments. These are just, I'm trying to introduce you to how these ideas were developing historically. So I'm not saying conclusively that it was actually good or bad. Nuclear families were, but the effect was seen at that time, that these changes, the kind of effect that they had on women's autonomy and leadership. So they felt that, women's leadership and autonomy was further diluted in nuclear family. To the contrary, what we feel today, the allegation of women that women want to live separately, and they don't want joint families because they feel that their autonomy will be much more in nuclear families. But in those days, it was seen that they were losing autonomy because of nuclear families and separation, and they had to completely depend on their male counterparts. So this was seen as depending on males. Today we are seeing, a different trend, a different sort of allegation between, the war of words between the group which promotes the ideals of joint family and the group that promotes the idea behind nuclear family. So we still have these debates continuing, right, in today's time and age, and how these were seen in a different time period. So yeah, as I said that earlier, separation was seen as subordination, but later, towards the, somewhere in the middle, it was seen as solidarity also. But so how many of you feel that separation can be solidarity? And that solidarity is productive and constructive in nature. So between these two, I'll just ask you to raise hands, and then later, because we're about to start our discussion after I go to the recent, the MENA region, as we say, Middle East and North African countries, how women are constructing their public sphere and how they are trying to feminize the public sphere in those parts, and the institutions that played an important role for migrant population, for the labor class, and for women were institutions like Hull House. So these institutions were created in city spaces where even single parent, women who were single parent, they could also afford a better life. They could use the facilities of better education because they had, community dining happening there. They had facilities for which they didn't have to toil. They could depend on those facilities. Those arrangements were there. So those spaces were unfolding well for women, for labor class, for migrant population. So these institutions like Hull House. So it's important to see what leads to what can be liberatory, what contributes to democratic principles, what contributes to liberatory practices, what liberates people, especially people on the margins, people on the periphery. So how the reality of the periphery and center is connected and how it changes. So institutions like Hull House. So for example, when we have better facilities, the whole idea of social welfare schemes in different countries is based on that you need to create certain institutions, certain facilities to bring people to the level playing field. And these historical arguments and these historical insights give us a perspective on how to build or how to create certain institutions and facilities and programs which can, bring people from periphery to the center and to the mainstream. So we've seen, and in the readings, please go through this whole idea of Hull House and how it was transforming the space and the public sphere and increasing people's participation, especially people on the margins. So there were women who considered that the private women on a public stage. So this was again adding to the guilt that many women who felt, and women who were speaking against wars, and women who were, when men were speaking against wars, they didn't face such a backlash. But when women were speaking against wars and certain state action, then they suffered a lot of backlash, and it was again disproportionate. So that in 70s and from 1870s to 1920s, it's considered as a watermark period, a high watermark period of or high watermark of women's public sphere and women's public influence. So in those days, the way the debates were happening and the kind of backlash people were facing and the changes that were happening. So people tried to read that. And I'll tell you a contemporary example and a historical example that very close to the industrialization period, it was seen. And today also, I'm in Aligarh right now. And here we have lock industry. And in lock industry, we see that women are given a machine at home. It's called a punching machine. And they have to punch keys. So they have to make holes in those keys. And the whole day they're doing that. So it's considered unskilled work. And it is unskilled work. Anybody can, learn it and keep doing it as long as you're able to protect your fingers. So at that time also, in shoemaking industry, so before the mass industrialization and mass production period, in the field of shoemaking, women were not coming to the workshop. So women were given the shoes and they were only trying to bind. The task was to bind the uppers of the shoes, which they could do from their kitchens also. They worked and they washed their hands and then they could do those tasks. So people said that, this can be done from the kitchen. So it's also a metaphor that was used. So not that literally they were doing it in the kitchen, but they could do it from the kitchen. So that's why also they said that, it's not even men's fault what to do, because men are also seeing that women's work is not that valuable. Even today, most of the unskilled laborer comes from women's labor. So they form the larger chunk of unskilled labor in the unorganized sector, even today. And in those days also, this was happening. So people said that how can you expect men to really respect women's work or the kind of work that women were doing? Because they felt that they were doing more complex work. They were doing more complicated, intricate work. And women were doing the work it's a child's play. So people said that, you can't even ask men to superficially respect women's work just because it is politically correct. Why should men respect this work which can be done by anybody? And why should we add value to such a work which can be, so Betty Friedan later on, they said that even the work that we do at home today also, they said that this work can be done by anybody. This work can be done. And the kind of work that women were doing outside also, they were given such work which again could be done. So they were replaceable. It was easy to replace. So unskilled labor is always easy to replace, and you always have a huge line standing there asking for work. So they said you cannot ask men to superficially respect such a work which can be done by anybody and is highly replaceable. You don't need skill for that. And then, as I said earlier, that ideology played a very, very important role even after revolutions, even when spaces were opened up, even when democratic institutions were developing. Why these things were again and again happening in a circular fashion? Because even Aristotle, Rousseau, all these thinkers, they had, as we were discussing, that they had also essentialized biological determinism and the whole ideology of sex difference, that there is also mental difference apart from the bodily materiality. So they said that temperamentally also they're different and they're better to play these roles than leadership roles and in statecraft. And those roles are, you need to be a little cunning, you need to be a little calculative, you need to be a little manipulative. So why should you force or why should you pressurize women to be like that? What Zydus, this lady from Kazakhstan said, that women feel pressured that they have to do these tasks and they have to be calculative, they have to be cunning. The moment you go out and work in the office, and we know about office politics, so everybody has to be a little wary of things and a little calculative. So women feel that, it's a pressure. And that is why the more modern take was also that women domesticity was a pushback to modernity. So earlier there were task-based work, there were work was task-oriented. Later it became time discipline. So today we work from 9 to 5, right? So there's a time discipline. You have to punch in, punch out. But earlier, the work was task oriented. So they said that in these changing times also, it is only the women who are maintaining task oriented work. And they are not indulging in this fast paced competition and work environment where you need to be time disciplined. So they were seen as resistance also to modernity. So all these arguments were being brought about to rationalize, to understand the changing situations. What do you think about it? Then I'll move to how women are doing things in the MENA region, which is again very interesting. Or you want to hold this thought and then come back to this question of task-oriented work and time discipline. So please hold this thought and we'll come back to it. So remember this one sentence I wanted to say, a very important note that women seem to advance in the most democratic moments of a struggle. So they do advance in the most democratic moments of a struggle, and the silencing of women often signals the rigidification of the movement as a whole. So when, at the most democratic moments of a struggle, of any movement, we see not just women, but even any marginalized population, it advances, it gets a chance. But when the movements are made rigid, where there is rigidification of a movement, there again people are pushed back. So this is what history teaches us. That's why it's a democratization, and dialogue is a constant process, because the moment things become rigid, those very ideals, those very movements can become counterproductive. Then there was another interesting, since we were talking about this, another interesting take on Republican motherhood. So Republican motherhood, it was seen as, it was seen very as a very encouraging idea, Republican motherhood, that, you are brought into the realm of politics, you are recognized as a citizen, you are a Republican, you belong to this republic. But Republic motherhood, again, your citizenship and your value as a citizen was incumbent on what? On motherhood. That's the whole idea behind Republic motherhood. Republican motherhood, that you are a good citizen when you're a good mother, when you're able to raise patriotic children who can sacrifice their life for their country, for their community. That's how you prove your ideals and your worth as a citizen. So you are a citizen, your role is recognized, you have a political role to play, rather. You have a political role to play by raising patriotic children, and especially patriotic men who can become soldiers. So this was seen as an oxymoron later on, right? Jay, you want to say something?
No, I'm just like when you were, I was thinking about how the Nazi Germany's propaganda, basically how it empowered women, where the idea of empowerment of women came from how many children they could birth. So
Yeah,
this
yeah,
sort
yeah.
of this sort of republicanism turning into nationalism, which which basically involved women in the political sphere, but also it also brought them to a certain sort of it restricted their mobility and restricted them to certain duties that they had to do in order
Yeah.
to keep earning that sort of status again and again and again. So it wasn't
Yes.
even set in stone at that point. So if you were a sort of up until a age of 25, if you were a single woman without a child, that was seen as appropriate, because up until 25 you could contribute, you could work as a some menial secretarial job. But after
Absolutely.
25, if you did not have a kid, if you did not
Yeah.
have sort of a family to look after, to raise, and to
Yes.
sort of ideologically influence as well, because that's what the idea of motherhood has always been also been categorized as, where spiritual sort of center of the house, even in
Yes.
religions as well, where Christianity, if you look at Christianity or Islam
Yeah.
or Hinduism, where women are
Yeah.
supposed to teach their children to be good religious kids, where
Yes.
and men are not given that duty. Men are supposed to do the work. That's the simple thing.
Yes.
But
Yes.
women are
And
supposed to handle the spiritual development of the kid as well as the physical development. Yeah.
yes, yes, absolutely. Spiritual, mental, and physical. Because men
Yeah.
who were coming back from the wars, if they couldn't handle their situation well, and if they were going
Yeah.
a little eccentric, mothers were blamed for that.
Yeah.
They couldn't raise stable children who could contribute as strong soldiers. Mothers were blamed for that. And that's why it was considered, it was a marker that the way your children turn out to be, your citizenship, your existence, your value will be assessed accordingly. So these things were happening, absolutely correct. And even state, not just religion, even state and politics was using the same logic to define women's worth. So we have to keep that in mind. And so that is why even when state institutions, new institutions, democratic institutions were developing, but these ideas were still being circulated and permeated in these institutions. Next is that how to integrate, for example, as we said, that why should men or anybody for that matter give space to anybody? I am doing this job and I'm doing it well. I'm doing it, it's fine, it's my individual effort. Why should I be worried about you? That's a basic question. So Nancy Fraser, there's a whole debate that how to integrate people in public sphere, and why should you be concerned about integrating people about public sphere? Why should you think about diversity? Why should you think about participation? Why should you? And if at all you should, then what should be the method? So some people said that, for example, Nancy Fraser said that there will be these spheres. One sphere will always dominate, regardless of be it a sphere based on sex divisions, racial divisions, religious divisions, ideological divisions, any division. So Nancy Fraser said that, there will always be a dominant group, a public sphere which is fragmented. Everybody believed in that. But in that fragmentation, there would always be a public sphere where one group will dominate, and there would be a public sphere of the dominant and public sphere of the subordinate. And it's extremely difficult to find a middle ground. Then the other group said that it is fragmented, but it's not fragmented in this manner that it can't be, you can't have a dialogue at all. You can have a dialogue, but for that dialogue, there should be some parameters. For example, the parameters that were considered to include people in dialogue, they said, no, you cannot include everybody. There have to be some parameters. They have to be rational. They have to be reasonable. They have to go beyond primordial identities and beyond, individually centered ideas. So they said these, practical, very rational standards one should have. Then another debate emerged, which clubbed these two ideas. They said that that is also correct to an extent. This idea is also correct to an extent, that who should be made part of the debate, who can have a debate, who can propose better, rational. When we say better, we mean rational, reasonable ideals. But only rationality and being reasonable is enough. I am rational, I'm reasonable. If I say that, why should you come to my city? We don't need you. We can find more workers. Rather, we should create more workers here. But you also need job. Right. But my rationality says that, my people here, they need more jobs. And they also, and if you come here, then their chances will be hampered, and the spaces will shrink for them. So rationality, then the whole idea of some empathy, not blind empathy, of course, not blind empathy, but some empathy, at least empathy to the point where you're ready to listen to the other person. You're not completely snubbing and dismissing on the outset. You're not completely rejecting the argument at the beginning itself. So empathy to that point where people are at least ready to listen to one another, to understand, to come to a conclusion, to find some solutions which are constructive for everybody, not just for one or two groups or one or two people or one or two sexes, but for everybody. So that is the third argument of how to integrate people and make these public spheres more integrated and inclusive. So the whole idea of empathy along with rationality. So empathy to the extent that you're at least open to the idea of listening and you don't feel hostile immediately in somebody's presence. So the idea of empathy. So this was the larger. And then in the MENA region, with this, I'll conclude and I'll open the floor for questions. Because I'll need your responses. In the MENA region, for example, in the Middle East and North African regions, women are creating these public spheres because the previous organizations and the previous conferences, it is said that they were very studiously evading these ideas of gender dynamics and women's concerns. So they, in your reading also, they've used this term that very studiously they're evading. But women are trying to create spaces. Women are trying to change some family laws. Women are trying to reinterpret some religious laws. So women are trying to do that. And sometimes they attract criticism for that, because some people feel that you cannot reform something which is fundamentally flawed. But those women are saying that this is the only option. When you can't completely eradicate a system and there is no way of doing it, rather, you will face such a backlash that your entire family, it might, it would lead to elision and complete obliteration. In that space, you have to be pragmatic. So this is called pragmatism in public sphere. And this has emerged largely from these regions and conferences where it was considered by, the rest of the world. It's felt that there is hardly any space. Still, women are creating space for themselves and for others also who are on the margins by bringing in these dialogues in public spheres, but through pragmatic approach. So my question to you is, pragmatism, is it transitorily, is it okay, or it can work in the long run also? Pragmatism in this particular idea and debate and discussion that we are having, and where women are saying that, by trying to find a ground from within, even if the system is flawed, even if the structures, but this is the this is the option that we have. So pragmatism, it works only transitorily for a period, or pragmatism can work forever in the long run also?
Like my preferred answer to give would be that pragmatism should work in the long run, and it sort of it. But if I like apply my mind to it, and if I give it a lot more thought, it like my basic answer is still that like, I prefer pragmatism to work in the long run, but it sort of creates this Ouroboros cycle where pragmatism in and of itself becomes a hurdle many times because we are thinking so literally, so rationally that we sort of put empathy, emotional components, and sort of it basically gives us blinders. The pragmatism, too much pragmatism also gives us blinders where we follow the straight narrow path where if anything irregular happens, it is not accounted for, it cannot be it cannot be accounted for, it cannot be handled properly. So like that's my sort of mindset right now where if I reflect on this, and yeah, that's
Yeah. No, absolutely. That is one perspective, that if you if the circle is not complete, then pragmatism also won't work in the long run, because then you still won't have those grievance redressals. You still won't have, and it will be a constant struggle. Though democracy and all these ideals are also a constant struggle, that because history tells us that any time a movement can become rigid and push people back, and the situation can revert in exactly the same way it started, so you'll be back to square one. So anyway, it's a constant struggle. But pragmatism, as an approach in the current period that we are seeing mostly in societies which are more culturally oriented. For example, I'll give you another example, another instance. In India also, are you aware of the Kharp regions in Western UP? Most people from India, people from other country, it's a state, Uttar Pradesh, where we are right now. I am talking from Uttar Pradesh, and within that state, there are different parts, east and west. In western part, there are Kharp regions. So we see this only as a phenomenon and not as a negative thing, or not as a commentary on Kharps or the systems. It's just an example, or we are just using the lens of Kharp to understand the cultural structures. So another question to you is, to all of you, for example, when we talk about group rights, and then we also talk about individual rights, and this is a very, very important debate in public sphere, for constitution, for amendments, for everything in most of the countries. And currently we are seeing that the way the world leadership is changing and indulging in all these debates, it becomes even more important to talk about these things as a dialogue. So cultural rights or group rights versus individual rights, because cultural systems, and most of the cultural systems, again, I started with this point, that all the foundation of all the societies is, and the structures are built on gender dynamics and gender relations, the way they, family alliances, marriage alliances, interpersonal communication, the way our worldview is formed. So they say that if you change our system, or if you give these opportunities, or if you make these things for women, and if they don't follow our system, then our system will collapse. Then what are you talking about our constitutional rights, that we have the right to preserve our cultural system and promote our values? If you are making these rights or making these opportunities or you're disturbing our cultural system, which is again a valid argument. What would you say to that? If you have a debate with the cultural groups or with the leaders who say that this is a fundamental thing, and if you want, what do you want to change? If you change even the slightest thing, our whole system will collapse. And then what are you talking about diversity? Then there will be homogeneity.
And representatively, a lot of these.
Yeah, Randall is speaking, I think, huh? Yeah.
Representatively, a lot of the more conservative groups are also represented by men only. Then. Exactly. And within this thing, I think what needs to be addressed is the representationalism within the more conservative groups as well. I mean, within this particular context.
Yes. That's why the proponents of group rights, they have talked about this. For example, Will Kemlicka, who is considered one of the important thinkers in multiculturalism, and thinkers who are on the same page, they say that, as long as you give women the right to education, health, if you take care of your women, if you give them right to education, and so this should be enough for you to buy or to negotiate for cultural or group rights. Do you think this is enough?
No.
No? Why do you feel
not?
Kendall also does. Let's see who feels this is enough. Then we can have a discussion. Who feels this is enough to bargain for group rights? That you're giving, enough rights for education and health to your women, then you're sorted. And you can bargain for group rights, because then you're not, harmful to any individual. Who feels that it is enough? That could also be a valid. See, we are all looking for solutions. Governments and policy makers are also looking for solutions. They try one solution, it doesn't work out. They try another. Sometimes it works out in a half-baked manner. Still, something is better than nothing. So how many of you feel that it is enough?
I think it totally depends on which situation you are in. For example, if you're an Afghani woman, somebody tells them, we'll give you education and health, they'll be like, yeah, we'll take anything right
Absolutely.
now, I mean, so I think it's, and when you have all of that, then you start feeling, oh, what about my self-actualization? I want to take risks. I want to do things that I want to travel the road less traveled. And, so if you are in that stage, then you're like, oh, this is not something that I'm okay with. I want more. So it totally depends. I remember there was this, in Germany, there was this really old woman I met who had seen wars. And I remember telling her that, I was traveling and I was like, I want to explore and I want to do things. And she was like, and I said, I don't want to settle down and I don't want a house. And I've been, working remotely since 2010. So, my work obviously gives me that luxury to do it. And she said, we would never understand that. We wanted a house in the suburbs, a garden, because the very fact that our husbands would be home at, 5 and just that family time and knowing that he's safe and I don't want to explore. I want that stability. I've not seen stability. So I think it totally depends on the background.
The context.
Exactly. I think that's what I was just going to say. It's very context driven. Where you are, what are... let's say what our realities are in the present moment, and the context really matters. Where I am from, what I am doing, what my background is, how my childhood has been, everything matters. So the social circumstances, I think I would like to put social circumstances on the first tier, and then obviously the kind of work you've seen, the kind of environment you've been raised in. So nurturing, the debate of nurture versus nature, everything matters, right? Even to Randall's statement, I'd add, these khap panchayats or these electorates or whatever these entities are.
The traditional juridical system, let's say. Let's not malign any cultural system. The traditional juridical system.
So these traditional cultural systems, they are mostly made up of men. They're very patriarchal in nature. So we have to see the, let's say, who's a part of that system. Are there any women? Are there men? Are there women who are taking decisions for women, or only men taking decisions for women?
I think there's a pattern emerging from this. Most of you feel that in cultural systems where women are represented substantially, they should be able to bargain better for group rights.
So for
especially for group rights, much more than individual rights.
Especially for group rights,
especially compared like group rights vis-a-vis individual rights. Yes.
So I'll tell you an example for women to be partaking in the arena of politics. Today, Vinesh Fogart has won, right? She's become a MLA today.
So for those who are not from India, can you give them the context?
So today, we had state elections. If somebody is not from India, for their context, we had state elections in India today in 2 of the states. And so this is one of the state I'm talking about, which has Khap Panchayat, or these so-called cultural, very strong social system.
The main center.
Yeah. They are the decisive bodies, basically, for everything, right? And these Khap Panchayats, actually, they came out and supported her now. Initially, they were against these women going into boxing or this arena, which was very masculine, right? And then now they're all with her because she stood against the system which was trying to demolish these girls. So she stood against this very strong politician, and now the whole village supported her, and she's come out as a winner. So there are very many things at play here. She's not just only won an election, it's a symbolic gesture, right? Where women, men, and other people of that region, they've told others that we stand in solidarity. So here again, we have these boundaries. People coming together.
So are you saying, Purvi, that they have changed?
I'm not saying they changed. It's context driven again. Because they saw their daughter being molested, their daughter being assaulted. So now they're standing, the community is standing for their daughter. Now she's become their daughter. She's the whole community's daughter, right? So that's how the context is.
So that's exactly.
Let's say if she'd married out of the caste, then she would have become the enemy of that cup or that social group. So the context is
very nicely explained. Very nicely, very precisely. You have explained the complexity of the situation, because sometimes, for example, I'll tell you my experience quickly. When I went to these areas, and especially in Western UP, because the Khap areas extend from Rajasthan, Western UP, Haryana. So there are different arrangements and layers. There's Sarv Khap, there is, there's Thamba, there is Thok, there are different layers. So it's actually a very interesting juridical system, and they call it it's not based on hereditary, it's not a competent person will be chosen and all that, but mostly it turns out to be hereditary because that person is considered competent who has seen the system. So it's considered democratic. It has different layers. So when I went for the first time, I felt it's absolutely fine. And they are very proud of their women also. They're saying that our women are civil servants, our women are into Air Force, our women are pilots, and they're highly educated. And I felt that's very nice. I think all these people who are bringing out these reports, they're biased. Then if you delve deeper and if you spend some time, then you realize that, the expectations. Then they said, then I happened to tell them that earlier I was a journalist. Then journalist, no, it's not a good job for women. You have to go out at odd hours. And I said I was a crime reporter. They said, oh, even worse. You can't. You have to go out at night and covering crime and all that. So then you see the difference, that what are acceptable spaces and spaces and what are unacceptable and absolute no, and where you can negotiate. So women also end up, and even men.
It's always us versus them.
Yes, yes. And the kind of choices that people make, again, are very context-based, and according to the acceptance levels of those choices in those spheres, the private spheres and even the public spheres. Even in the public sphere, the choices that people make are largely dependent on the ideas that are promoted in the private spheres. Yeah, Randall, you wanted to say something.
I think in India, particularly, caste and these specific roles for women is so deeply intertwined. They mutually reinforce each other. Especially, I mean, it's and especially as you move up the caste, there is further repression of these roles as women are given more spaces to occupy more spaces in society.
Yes, yes. And it is also considered, you rightly pointed out, because when we do research and when we go to the field, we see that people who were considered coming from the marginalized or subordinate castes, the men of those castes, they say that, now that we are earning a little more and our income has stabilized, we would not want our women to work out, because anyway the underprivileged women's work was not considered as a pure work. Lower caste work was not considered as pure work in general, but women of lower caste, they were even, character assassination and questioning their dedication towards their family, and all that was highly it was seen in very bad light. So they don't, so the way, if they're moving up the economic ladder, usually what happens that women's domesticity starts creeping in. So people want that if the family, you don't need to earn, because women are seen only as, as a helping hand, as a support unit. So if the family doesn't need all that income, extra income, why do you need to put that extra effort? So it's not seen as your choice or something that you enjoy, or the way you want to add or contribute to your personality. It's only seen that women are dedicatedly doing these things for the upliftment of the family, and specifically and clearly in economic terms, in no other from no other perspective or lens. Yeah.
Interestingly, economics might be quite at the center of this thing to kind of push these boundaries, because right now in the country, there's universal basic income being regularized in almost every state for women only. And in that sense, women who are majors and but who are less than 60 years of age.
Yes.
So they are the ones who are economically, so to say, productive. So this is what is pushing the boundaries and creating more spaces.
Yes. So that's why we need to keep a track of the policies, the institutions, the arrangements, the facilities that can push these boundaries. And we have to look into the history for that. We have to look into the present experiments and proposals that come up. So absolutely, these are the initiatives that push the boundaries. And as you said, you feel that economic concern is at the center. How many of you feel economic concern is at the center and things can change only through economic intervention? Or
Certainly,
largely, but yeah, largely.
Certainly, I feel that when a woman is financially independent, things do change. Yet again, obviously, there are very many hierarchies and ladders and boundaries that she has to cross. Again, like you mentioned, that she's seen as a helper, as a caregiver in a primary role. So when a woman goes out to work, especially after marriage, she's actually just seen as a appendage of her partner. Let's say he's the main breadwinner or the father-in-law, whatever, the male member, and then she's just helping in bringing some extra money, extra cash. But certainly to that woman, she's gaining financial autonomy, right? So she's going out, she's networking, she's meeting a lot of people, she's having her own group or an excess of people where she can share her woes or whatsoever, and she's also learning about certain tactics of how life is supposed to be outside the environment or a sphere of house. So she's certainly seeing the public as well as the private division of public and private sphere. Again, from the society's point of view, which is highly patriarchal, masculine nature, she's just another helper. So there are different viewpoints. At the same point, I know that certain women who've internalized the domestication work, they'd be like, I don't know why she's working. So even women have their own, it's a very strong, debatable point.
There's a division. Women say, and everybody says that you're doing a glorious task of taking care of the family. You're doing such an important, such a valuable task of taking care of the family, which should be everybody's responsibility.
Exactly.
And it is everybody's responsibility. It's a glorious task for everybody to take care not only of the family, because I'll tell you, there was also a time in 18th century where, it was pointed out that women who were only within the domestic fold and not very well educated, they were actually becoming selfish. Could that be a possibility? So there was a take on this, that they were actually becoming selfish, self-centered and narcissistic because they could only think about themselves and their family at the max. Otherwise, only about themselves, how to, create an impressive table, and, how to impress guests, and how to handle the family. And they, at the max, they could go to the extent of family's welfare at all if they had this understanding of what is welfare in real terms, apart from patriotism and nationalism. So this was also one perspective, that it could turn people into selfish beings if they're not exposed to external realities. If somebody has faced hardships outside, and if somebody doesn't know about those hardships, then that person won't understand and won't be able to contribute as a partner, as a collaborator. You won't be able to do it. And that's why, again, the difference of sexes emerges, because then men also feel that they can't connect with women the way they can connect with other men, because other men can understand those things. And women also feel that, there is no connection, there's some gap in communication, and it leads to further fault lines in society. Yeah.
Yes.
I relate with that. This is just a little. I don't know. This is a very personal thing, but because you've put it out there, I think the part of me that doesn't want to be a mother is because I know I will become selfish. I'll start only thinking of my family. Yeah, that's a reality. I relate with that, because then I feel that I'll just become very selfish and very self-centered for my own family. Whereas right now I have a bigger vision and a bigger goal of, going to my constituents, meeting with people, having meetings, communities, social, everything is in my vocabulary. But the moment I am very scared of that fact. And that is very prominent in my brain.
Yeah, that has been a prominent debate earlier. Since 18th century, it has been a very, very prominent debate. And it's interesting that people are gaining this consciousness. Not that one should not embrace motherhood, or one should reject motherhood, not giving any conclusive argument or judgment on that. And I'm not judging anybody here. We're not judging any. These are perspectives and concerns which we need to acknowledge.
And also choice.
And also
choice,
which has to be acknowledged. And and if somebody, you can ask for explanation. There's no offense in asking for explanation, because you might gain some insights into life, how people look at life. There are many countries where actually women, what you said, Purvi, many women are facing this reality. One reason, big reason for that is that the state welfare mechanism is not supportive. Family mechanism is not very supportive. So what choice do people have? What choice do women have if they feel that they are going to lag behind because of certain decisions in their life, and they feel left out? Or there's this entire theory of strain, that if they feel that it will strain their life chances, then anybody would make these practical choices, and these would be very rational choices. So if the society wants women to participate in private spaces, in public spaces, there have to be better arrangements, there have to be better facilities, and there have to be also the acknowledgement and calculation of the time that they spend in these private tasks that are expected of women. So there has to be a proper calculation of that, along with the aspirations that everybody, not just women as individuals, have. So these are very important discussions, but I'm glad that you are brave enough to express your concerns and your fears, because women feel that they'll be judged and stigmatized, and it'll ruin their lives and opportunities. And they also feel that later, if they change their decision, they'll again be held accountable. That earlier you said this, now I'm telling you, you felt depressed, that's why you changed your stand. And women feel depressed. That's what people say, that, if you don't have, it won't lead to a full life. But it's really important for men and women. Men can feel that way, the way women are feeling. Men can feel more attached. Men can be more paternal. Sometimes women might not be maternal. Again, the whole idea of essentializing. We feel that, and it's such a bad take on men also, that men don't have these attachments the way women have. It's such a bad take on men. It's such an unfortunate take on men equally. So the whole structure, these structures, there are such a sad commentary on both the sexes. So absolutely, such an interesting take. Yeah.
There's also this stereotype that in especially American movies, Hollywood movies, that there are women who are homemakers. They bring these homemade cupcakes for their for the children's events, and I think it's sort of a status, like you said, it's also a status symbol that if you can afford a homemaker as a wife, that's a status thing. And also what Randall said about caste, there's this. My dad used to say this, and I could never forget it. He said that no matter how liberal a person seems, you will know how liberal they are by two things: if they share roti and beti with somebody else. So beti, it's like roti beti is like the Ramban of tests,
Yes,
Do you
yes,
eat
yes.
with somebody of the other caste? Are you okay with sending? It's not that if you're ready, you can bring a bahu to your house, but you will not give a beti to somebody who you think is not
Yeah.
is not there. And also about that point about spaces of solidarity.
Yeah.
So in Bangladesh, I think I studied a lot about there was this constant bit of how exploitative. So the West kept saying that how exploitative these factories are, which create cloth, and they hardly pay anything. And I sort of went to interview the women, and of course a lot of it was through NGOs. I didn't directly go to Bangladesh, but the women came and told me, they're like, "What are you saying? We get out the house, our husbands don't abuse us for those 8, 10, 12 hours, and we are happy to be out for 15 hours also. At least it's better than our husbands beating us up, and we get some money, and also
Yes.
we have, it's all women's spaces, we are so free there." And so and there's, like you said, there's another angle to it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not just like black and white, that it's
Yeah.
exploitative. So they're like,
Yes.
we are doing this, and then they started forming unions, and
Yeah.
they started asking for, like you said, group rights. So I
Yeah.
think, again,
Very good
contextual.
example. Earlier also in jute industry, when partition was there, in jute industry, even in unions, women workers were part of the union, but never in leadership role, obviously. And their concerns for better facilities, hygiene, and all that was also not. So women had to form these separate spaces. Sometimes it's just the need of the hour that you end up forming. Some people say that as she discussed from Kazakhstan, that all women colleges, sometimes they help women develop better personalities, because if the society is such which has different expectations from men and women, sometimes it's helpful to have all girls schools and all boys schools, because it builds better personalities or give them opportunity. They feel free without the gaze, a male gaze. They feel freer in that environment. So we have these multiple, but there should be choices. So in a society, you could have these all girls, all boys colleges and schools. You could have the co-education system. So it's a matter of choice, that at least you give these choices to people who want to go to this particular space, who want to opt for that particular space, whatever works for people in the given context. So are we saying that ultimately everything will lead to homogenization, because then there will be so much exchange and people will lose their cultural moorings? Are we concluding on that note? That would not be a very interesting note. Are we saying that we are moving towards homogenization and there is no other way? Mr. Ranveer, and then we'll go to Jay. Yeah.
Okay, hi. Thank you very much. I was thinking that to add so many things in between, but since past many days, there are only just 2-3 people who always just talk. So I was just thinking some other people should also contribute.
Okay.
So I would like to just hold this, though we are already just running short of time. It's only just 10 minutes, but just adding a new perspective to the whole thing, which we are just discussing about. I would like to bring attention about Rawls' theory of justice. So if
Yeah.
we relate this whole pragmatism and also where we talk about the rational, practical solution and all.
Yeah.
Now, Rawls was saying that, see, this is all about the equal rights, equal liberties, which are just compatible with the with similar scheme of liberty of the others also.
Yes.
Now, when we are doing this building this whole discourse about that, what is there, how it has been assessed, who is assessing this thing, and why we are assessing this in this particular fashion. Now, I would like to add this the concept of desert within law. So this is all about that our when we are talking about the choices, right? So our claim about which we are building this discourse is limited to those choices rather than what any individual deserve. So this is something which limiting many chances, many opportunities, and it is creating a narrative which is not wholesome together.
Yeah.
So that we have to consider. I think that
Yes, absolutely. The part of deserving, what you said, Martha Nussbaum and Amartya Sen tried to address that. They couldn't do it fully, but they attempted through human capabilities approach. So this came after John Rawls. Earlier, there was this cooperative conflict theory of justice, which said that, for some, collective well-being, some people need to compromise, or some interests have to be compromised if there is clash of interest, right? That because cooperation was the goal at that time. So cooperation is the goal. Equal rights was not the goal. Cooperation was the goal, and within that frame, it was seen that only one particular group was being sacrificed, or one person's or one group's rights were being hampered, and even if they deserved, they couldn't. Then came utilitarian theory. We are also very well aware of utilitarian theory. Then came John Rawls' theory, which looked like really addressing the larger issues and really taking care of the individuals along with the groups. But then the whole idea of deserving and aspirations was still left out. That even if you have, you're providing services and goods and benefits, but still, if I'm not happy with the kind of work that I'm getting or the benefits, or if you're giving me this much kg of ration, so you are saying that it is leading to my well-being and for my survival, but what about my aspirations? So human capabilities approach was devised for that, and Martha Nussbaum has given these 10 standards of human capabilities. So it was envisioned by Amartya Sen and Martha both, but Martha gave the 10 exact parameters. But for that, we need a very good state system and a very awakened civil society and collaborative efforts to achieve those 10 human capabilities, because it sounds very easy, but it's extremely difficult to achieve. But this consideration was at least there in the theories of justice. The maximum consideration for desires, idea of being deserving and aspiration was addressed in human capabilities approach for justice. And but though the most practical one, and most of the policymakers, they follow two largely in most of the countries, which is utilitarian and Rawlsian theory. But we wish that better policies and better welfare schemes come up taking into consideration what you said. Jay.
So basically, I had this sort of thought where when I'm not sure when Zendes and you were discussing how some women basically feel guilty if they either stay as stay at home, act as parents and stay at home, and then either they go out and work and they feel guilty the other way. I think it sort of boils down to how much dignity and autonomy is afforded to their decision. If basically it basically boils down to if you're staying at home as a mother, but you do not get that appreciation, and you do not get that dignity in that case, right? Then you feel guilty where okay, oh, I should be working, okay, I need that work. But if you go to work and then you are not treated with respect there, it's not a choice for you. It's sort of okay, you were drafted into, you had to go work because all the men are off fighting. That's sort of extreme example, right? So there's not dignity to your work afforded there. It's a necessity. You do not have a choice there, and you are basically you are that sort of way. But in the case of if you're staying at home, you do not have a choice. You have to be a mother. That's your destined path. You have to be a mother. These are the sort of duties you would perform. That every single, you will clean the house, all that thing, traditional sort of implement. And but you don't know, at the end of the day you still get abused. You still get none of those freedoms that should be given, and that constrains you in that case. So that's my view on that case, where dignity and autonomy serve a very important role in this discussion.
Yes, is the value system that is followed.
Yeah.
If you attach dignity to this particular thing, that will become more valuable. If you attach
Yeah.
dignity and respect and acceptance to that particular thing,
Yeah.
absolutely, it's about that, absolutely.
But it also basically turns into the zero sum game as well, right? Where I think when we're talking about rationality, we are confusing it with zero sum mentality, where okay, you are either this or that, and you can either subsume to this entire working woman idea where everything is your career, everything is your career, everything is how much money you bring in, how much how much you can show the society that how much this I have achieved.
Absolute one-dimensional approach. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you are basically a working woman, having a kid is a liability, having a child, being a mother is a liability to you, and having a mother is sort of seen as weakness in your career field. That sort of zero sum mentality becomes, where motherhood is now
Many people are saying, many people are justifying this wage gap. They're saying, Jordan Peterson, I think, if you hear
Jordan Peterson, yeah, he's
a very, very interesting debates. And now I listen to all the debates from all the sides that, what are people saying? Because they must be making sense. If so many people are listening to them, then there should be some sense. So even if you don't agree with them, or if you feel that they are only touching the surface and they're not going deeper into the structures and the bones of the society, but the point that he makes, and many other people who align with his ideas, they also say that how can women have equal negotiating power? Because they have these biological extra things that they have to do for the society and family. So by default, they will not have this negotiation. So there is this debate also. So for that to improve then we need to think about how to improve people's negotiation power and negotiation ability, and how the economic structures, the social structures, the political structure are going to accommodate these ideas and these debates. Yeah.
Also, I just had one more comment.
Yeah, just concluding, I think.
Yeah. So when we're talking about separation of public sphere as well, where women have their own separate space and men have their own separate space, this sort of thing where a necessity of separate public spheres is only relevant when these are safe spaces essentially. But if we sort of build fortresses around these two public spheres, and do not build neutral grounds as well, where I think neutral grounds should be more prevalent, where there are certain safe spaces where women can discuss their ideas, their thoughts, and their feelings with other women in a safe environment, and men should have the same thing. But but it also creates these dogmas where these become very inaccessible, very high concept things, where both sides then cannot come to a sort of middle ground and interact properly, which is basically the entire concept of dialogue, where nobody can come to a middle ground, where everybody's stuck in their own sort of bubble that they have created. And while the intentions were good, these have sort of mutated far beyond the original intentions, where they're constrained by rationality essentially.
Yes, because nobody's saying that people are doing these things deliberately, or they're against one particular group or one kind of people, but these debates, and people rationalize their existence and their choices. So as you said that it's difficult to find the middle ground, though some things like safety and security should be common agenda for everybody. That's a common concern for everybody. It should be a common concern, but that is also it has become a gendered concern. So but while men are also saying that they are facing a different sort of violence all the time, and the stress that stress, violence, safety, security, these should have been common concerns, but they're not. And we still are dealing with these ideas, and we are still addressing these issues because of as we'll go back again to the idea of common sense, because it is still seen as common sense. It is still, seen as biologically determined and essentialized. And that's again going back to the same argument that ideology plays such an important role here. and especially sex ideologies and all these stereotypes, they play such an important role here, that the things which should have been so absolutely common, that should have been the connecting cord to collaborate with one another, is being seen as separate vision and separate space. So thank you for bringing this up. I'll just dictate it to you and maybe share this. I didn't share this reading. So the whole idea of safety audit, where women and men, earlier it was only done for women, now it can be done for both women and men, in your cities, in your colleges, or where in your working spaces, in your professional environment. There are parameters to test it, where you feel safe, where you don't feel safe, and what are the reasons. So earlier, when the framework was built for it, it was largely for women. So I'll just tell you, but now it can be extended, because there are workplace concerns which men also face. There are concerns where men also feel a little difficult to navigate. So we can have this sort of, it's called a safety audit of cities and spaces. So it was started for women in Canada. Now it is being done in Lucknow, in Delhi, in all these cities in India, and it is extended. So we're doing here also in our part. So it can be done for both. It will be very interesting to see in your regions, wherever you are coming from, to do this audit both for men and women and see the difference, and the difference of concern, and the difference of security issues and matters for both. It would be very interesting to see that. So I'll tell you quickly. So these include lighting, ability to walk with ease, such a human capability. It's mentioned in human capabilities approach also. How crowded or deserted a space is, so how it will impact your mobility. The diversity of genders, how open or enclosed it is, how visible one is to either inhabitants or shopkeepers, if you're easily visible or not to inhabitants and shopkeepers. Do you want to hide and go? Do you want to, you want people to look at you to feel safe? So all these things matter. And then we have this whether or not security or police are nearby. Do you want the police to be nearby? Why do you want police to be nearby? Finally, it is important to gauge how a person feels in a space. So it has some objective considerations and some subjective considerations. So this subjective consideration would be very interesting to see between men and women. So where men feel safe, where women feel safe, where men feel unsafe, where women feel unsafe. So the objective would be largely for everybody, but the subjective ones will be very interesting to see in safety audit. So I would recommend you, and it will be a very interesting exercise and contribution if you could do it. The safety audits.
I think Ranveer wanted to say something, and we've run out of time already. So Ranveer, you can quickly say it, and then we.
I think I will hold my horses basically.
No, but you made such interesting points. If you can summarize in 30 seconds, let's say.
Okay, it just when Jaya was adding, so one thought came to my head. The other day I was listening to a podcast. So the speaker just mentioned a very interesting thing, particularly about the maternity benefits. So in public sector, when we are talking about the maternity benefits, somehow the service of the woman gets secured. And when she join back the service, she just progress in her career. But in corporate world, this happened completely the otherwise. So 1 year gap within a corporate, that is just pushing woman 4 year back.
Yes.
And the author, the person who was just talking about that within that podcast, she mentioned some case studies of some corporate houses which give some kind of maternity benefit there, where the security of services was also ensured, where women ended up in the leadership role in the very later years. Which, if they will not be getting those benefits in those initial years of motherhood, they will never achieve to the role of CEO and the major key roles in any corporate world. So this is really important, that how systems are just understanding this disparity and how they are dealing with it, how they are just developing the mechanisms to deal with it.
And how
I
would
teach
you
in a university, and sometimes when there will be a vice chancellor's meeting, it's very, I say it's very astonishing to hear some dean who is a woman is saying at 8 o'clock in the evening when meeting just going and going, and she's saying, "Sir, I have to go back to home. I have to cook food for my family." She's a
Yeah.
dean, and still she's concerned. She's holding such a key position in a big institution, but still she's burdened with those kind of responsibilities which are just pulling her back.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
there
yeah.
are so many complexities that we need to acknowledge.
And here again the caste angle comes in, what Rendell said, because now the caste movements are also saying that, the privileged people, they are taking our services. What about our women who are giving these services? So what about their rights? What about so we have to be prepared for these questions, and we have to be prepared with better social, political, and institutional arrangements, because obviously class and caste, if it overlaps, and the whole cycle of exploitation and breach continues, because this is a very valid, because earlier again in 18th 19th century, many women started saying that, we'll hire services. So people who were talking about unity, or unified way of seeing things, and then diversified way of seeing things, so oneness and difference, when they started going to the difference logic, they saw that, this would lead to exploitation of another segment of women and also of men. So there have to be better arrangements, and we have to consider these things and take these things into consideration, especially in places like India, where we have such a rigid caste structure.
On a lighter note, I would add that sometime I studied in JNU, so sometime we used to just discuss it on a very lighter note that even in all the households where feminist women live, the domestic help does not come for a day and two, then their feminist will be questioned by within their household itself. So that's also the reality of the life.
That argument we hear a lot, but I don't think that's a valid argument. We can have another discussion on that, but it's very, what you said is valid. But the onus doesn't lie only on the woman of the house, again, because then we can essentialize it. Yeah, because it's also the men, the other family members, the elderly, everybody, kids involved. So if if a woman who's coming to work at your place, or a man who's coming to
Our
work,
basic training of consuming food is very problematic.
Yeah.
So just one third of life is just going either preparing the food or just eating the food and all.
Yes. And people, since that's what people said, that women are being encouraged to move out, but men are not being encouraged to share the household responsibilities and duties equally. Because if that is done, and if arrangements for that, our offices and professional spaces also have to change a little, so that they don't ask people to work overtime, they don't overburden people, both men and women, with so much work, so that people have time to share the burden. Usually men are not given time in their professional spaces to share the burden, and women feel guilty, so they try to come back early, they try to negotiate even at a lower salary, or they remain at lower jobs, because they feel that this part is more important and there's no one to take care of things at home. So they do it voluntarily. So it's we need to talk about these things in our professional spaces also, because just changing the domestic space won't help. The public spaces, the professional spaces, the professional rules and regulations, the duty manual, everything has to change if people really want to improve the social, political, economic structure. So professional spaces have to be more conscious of the demands that they are making on their employees. So yeah, absolutely.
In Sweden, they call it parental leave, Ranveer, and they actually judge men who do not take it. So they are actually the way we judge women who leaves a child and comes. So they even judge the men and think of
sometimes
it.
feel jealous with my female colleagues who are having this maternity leave, extended the child care leave, which is just a very longer period of time. They can avail just in pieces, bits and pieces, and take care of the kids.
Yeah. At least childcare leave should have been given to men also.
Yes, definitely.
That is you can take it at any time, any point of time. At the time of your, kids are in class 10, or at any point they're going for college. So that should have, at least, because there is no biology attached to that.
Yes,
you know,
definitely.
you're not feeding, you're not. So at least the childcare leave should have been given to men also. Absolutely, yeah.
Lovely discussion, Tarushika, Dr. Tarushika. It's, you can see it's extended beyond 15 minutes. So you can imagine how popular the discussion was. And we still, I think there's so much we can talk about this. And I'm so grateful that you know, came to our, give a session for in dialogue studies, for dialogue studies program. And I think you, as usual, always given a lot of food for thought, made us introspect a lot. We will all go back and think about the other side. And I think what we all, probably the participants, also learned is that you cannot just, not just this is just one area, but I think this will extend to the other areas where they will start thinking about, no, there has to be another angle as well, more than just my opinion or my experience, or where I come from. So thank you so much. This exercise was much needed. And
No, thank you so much, because
grateful.
these topics were such that I also needed your perspectives, because you come from such diverse backgrounds and many of you are professionals and you have your own input. So that's why, and apologies for someone who felt that it would, break the flow. I hope it didn't break the flow and it was constructive. And Rendell asked for some other readings that I mentioned. So I'll try to send the readings on email and you may share them, those readings with everybody. So thank you so much. I also had a very good time. Thank you.